We're going to spend some time today talking about prayer and praying together. It was important to Jesus when he gives us the Sermon on the Mount. He's giving us this is how you live as a disciple. Sermon on the Mount's practical. And it's so important in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus actually talks about prayer in a couple of different places. And so if it's important to him, then it needs to be important to us. So in one place, Jesus talks about prayer and he says, you ask, seek, and knock. Let me read it to you. This is chapter 7, verse 7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened for you. I mean, that's actually unbelievable. It's unbelievably encouraging. Now, the question I immediately have is well, what do we ask about? Do we have to ask in the right way? Does it have to be theologically correct? But Jesus has just spent a whole bunch of time through this Sermon on the Mount talking about multiple different areas in our lives. He's talking about money. He's talking about relationships. He talks about marriage and divorce. I mean, he talks about our time, how we worry and we have anxiety. He talks about just the basic things of life. And then is when he says, ask, seek, and knock. So the implication is that you would ask about everything, even the things that you feel like may be selfish to ask for. I want to ask, I want to ask God to bless other people because that seems more appropriate. But God's saying, come to him with everything. Here's the major thrust of this passage. The thrust is this, that the door has been opened for you to talk to God, and you should. You should be consistent and persistent in talking to God. You can talk to him about the things you're upset about and the things that you're excited about. We see this example in the Psalms. The psalmists rail against God when they're upset. They say, God, how could this happen? But see, they go to God. God invites you in. He wants to spend time with you. He wants to have a conversation with you. He wants to hear from you. And I want you just to pause for a second and think about that. That the God who spoke the whole world into existence wants to hear from you. And he says, pursue, ask, seek, and knock, and to keep pursuing. And then he says, those who ask, they'll receive, the door will be opened. Now, sometimes we take that too far and we think, oh, it's just magic. And so if I ask for this, God has to give it to me. And if God doesn't give it to me, then maybe I didn't ask in the right way or use the right words. But that's not really what the passage is talking about. It's not good theology. In fact, it's really important. The passage goes on, and I'll encourage you to go and read that together with your group. It goes on to give an illustration for what God's like. God is like a good father treating his son who needs something. Sometimes as a father, you immediately grant that request. It's something that makes sense. But what he says is, whoever his son asked for something would not give his son the good gifts. From the early church all the way up till now, we see the theologians of the church zeroing in on that idea of the good gifts. God doesn't just give any gift. Often what we ask for is not what we really need, or it's not in God's timing. We ask for something that we long for it, but God has a different timing that would be his good gift. And so God, with the perspective of a father who can see in the distance, who knows every bit of your life before your life and all the way into the future, God, with that kind of perspective, gives good gifts to us. So he says, pursue him, spend time with him, ask. Don't be afraid to ask God for anything, to speak with God. But also understand that God is like a good father that gives you good gifts. He's answering. Sometimes we feel like he's not, we don't see it, but he answers. It's often in his timing and his perspective to give you the good gifts. And here's the third thing, that as we ask, seek, and knock, it has these implications, and we see this in other places in Scripture, of wrestling. It's like a conversation where we're wrestling this out with God. And in that act, as we keep on asking, keep on seeking, keep on knocking, and as we do that, oftentimes our own hearts are changed. That our heart becomes formed in the asking as we talk to God about this, as we discuss it with God, and as we even listen to God. Our hearts then are formed, and we are changed even in the process of praying. It's so often that God begins to mold us, even in the asking. So that's my encouragement to you. This is about a conversation with God that you should have. Now, I want to back up because earlier than this, Jesus actually explains a format for prayer. I don't want you to get caught up on the format. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. Prayer doesn't need to look like that. But sometimes it's helpful to really structure our prayers. And so Jesus gives his disciples a prayer, and he says, you can pray this way. And he's not saying you have to pray exactly this prayer, although we say this prayer, the Lord's Prayer, together as a church every week. But he's not saying you have to pray exactly this way. He's saying this is a structure for you to pray. And I want to encourage you as a group to talk about this a little bit. Do you have a structure for prayer? You could walk through the Lord's Prayer, and you start off with who the Father is. He's a father, and he's invited us to talk to him as a father, that close of a relationship. But he's also holy. He's the God over the whole universe. And so there's a holiness also to this moment that we get to enter into the throne room, so to speak, and speak to the Father, this holy Father. But we ask that God's will would be done in our life, and that's an act of submission. And we then ask for the things that we need, that we long for. We also then confess the places where we've chosen our way over God's way. And then we ask for help in forgiving others. And we ask God to lead us in our path. And you can see how that's a structure, that you can pray your own words with that, but you have some sort of a format. Other people will find it helpful to just do something simple like ACTS, A-C-T-S, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. Supplication is a word for asking for things you need. And so maybe a format like that. Maybe you have a different one. What does prayer look like for you? I want to encourage you to build a habit of prayer. That this would be something that you would do in your own life, that you would carve out time for it. That it's also something that you would do with your spouse and with your children. Not just to pray a prayer together that you've memorized, but to be intentional about prayer. To teach your children to spend time with God. And to teach your grandchildren. And to do it together with a friend or with a spouse. You see, these are important moments. They're holy times. God hears them. And they actually form us. And so I want to encourage you to to come up with a place to pray, a time to pray. And even for some of us, we could use a little bit of a format. Now, God doesn't care. He's not going to go, oh, you messed up the format. It's just helpful for me to structure that time when I go, hey, how should I spend, if I have 20 minutes, can I pray for 20 minutes? You know, I'm at that phase in life where it's dangerous. If I close my eyes for 20 minutes, I'm probably not waking back up, right? I'm out for the night at that point. It's just asleep. But if I were to do it, what would that look like? How would I structure it so that I can actually begin to build the habit of praying? Well, I want to encourage you to talk about this in your group and then to spend a little bit of time praying together as a group.